All right. Hello, everyone. Today is Monday, January the 12th, 2026. And today I'm going to be recording a video for the new moon in Capricorn coming up um, on the 18th of the month. And I would just basically like to introduce this one with a kind of a warning. First of all, you may notice that I've decided to wear a funny hat for this video. This is perhaps an attempt to lighten the mood a little bit in the face of heavy transit, heavy astrological weather. Um, the last time I recorded a video, I was mentioning what happened in Venezuela with Maduro. And since that, we have had a number of events in the news, primarily ICE shootings of civilians in the state of Minnesota and Portland. And at the same time, there's also a media blackout and mass protests. Perhaps, apparently, there's word that 500 people have been killed in clamping down on protests in Iran while there's a media blackout. Not just a media blackout for the internet, but apparently there's a total communication shutdown with Iran. And in the midst of all this, I figure, as an astrologer, it's interesting because I realize, for one thing, I'm going to admit that I am an amateur astrologer. I have done quite a number of paid chart readings for people, but if you've ever tried to like make a divination practice into a money making business, unless you're like famous, like you're a famous psychic or you have some sort of claim to fame already, it's kind of difficult to do this. So I'm kind of instead of I'm basically just making a lot of videos. I'm not doing a lot of client work for people, and in all of this, there's a certain I realize there's a number of creative choices to be had with how you are going to approach doing astrology videos. And for example, some astrologers cover current events, some astrologers don't. Um, but this is basic like principle that you can see the archetype playing out at any number of different levels, whether that's in global politics, whether that's in your own personal life, whether that's a something that's more localized in the community and stuff like that. And in was kind of the astrology, what I'm realizing is that I can see this archetype that is present in the events of this early January that has to do basically, if you look at the planets, we've got the stellium in Capricorn. We just had a double cazimi of Venus and Mars in Capricorn, and now Mercury is conjoined Mars. And these were all in an opposition to Jupiter. Jupiter has been in a trine to Saturn and Neptune. Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn, and the big transit of this year is Saturn and Neptune moving into Aries. I don't know if that's too much, but this is basically the problem is that Saturn and Neptune, if you Saturn and Neptune is a depressing combination of planets because if you take Saturn on its own, Saturn stood for the lead weight of alchemy, to associate with things like melancholy and depression and sadness and stuff like that. And then if you combine it in a conjunction with other planets, the you have the opportunity to emphasize certain qualities of Saturn over others. And with Neptune there, Neptune may perhaps take the edge off, like a sort of a comforting anesthetic, but it's not. It still could be fairly depressing, like an addict or a junkie who's self-medicating to kill the pain or something like that. And I don't know, there could be a certain sort of humanitarian easing of the burden with Neptune, but it's still a gloomy, depressing kind of quality, right? Now, in this, I'm not going to be specific, but there was some certain shit going down in the local community that I am going to be. I don't even know all the details myself, so perhaps it's best for me not to speak directly on what happened. But the thing is that at the level of worldwide spotlight, it's more, to me it seems like it's more, it gives itself to a public spectacle which we're all kind of paying attention to because we all are concerned about what transpires in the world that we live in. And so it seems more appropriate to focus more on those things than things that are perhaps transpiring at a more localized level that I am somewhat alienated, or perhaps it's not my place to speak on, right? Now, at the global level, we are all, we are all the crew of Spaceship Earth. So we all, as citizens of the planet, we all have a basic stake in what happens at the planetary level. And with that in mind, I have to also realize that in doing this channel, I am there's certain, yeah, to go back to this, there's certain creative choices to be made about doing a channel like this. And one, you may notice that the attitude that I take may one of the things I like to emphasize is that I don't like to be sensationalistic, right? And that there's something about using the strategy of sensationalizing dramatic events for the sake of what, self-promotion, trying to compete with an algorithm. To me, this seems kind of cheap and trashy, and so I like to take more of a high road rather than trying to cash in on sensationalistic dramas. But I have to admit that this is a fairly hectic year that we're entering into. And since recording my last video, we've already had a number of fairly dramatic events taking place. And one of the, I don't, I think it's not my place to judge or tell other astrologers what they should do or how they should, go about generating content for their astrology channels. But when it comes to, let's say, when there are civilians being killed by ICE, personally, I have chosen not to watch the video of that. And I know that there's a current, like I saw some other astrologer come up in the algorithm where they were, the day that it happened, they were looking at the chart to like divine information of like what happened. Were they innocent? Were the person shot innocent, or were they really obstructing, or like, and it's sort of like, I don't even want to watch the video, man, let alone try to do a divination on that stuff. And like, there's another question of if I'm getting hired as an astrologer for any, like, I've never, I don't know, like perhaps like maybe it's not outside the realm of possibility that somebody would hire an astrologer to do like a horary reading on that. But if I'm not even being commissioned to do that kind of work, why would I want to burden myself with that kind of like karmic load when, first of all, at least, I mean, I guess I do have the privilege of being a Canadian citizen, and that it's the responsibility of Americans to for the way that their democracy is playing out is something that, as a Canadian citizen, at this point, unless you guys seek to annex us, then you're gonna make your guys' business my business. Then it'll be a lot more fucking personal than if I'm just a Canadian guy watching this on the news, right? So basically, whether or not whatever happened with the killing of innocent civilians by ICE, I haven't watched the videos. I haven't done any divinations on it. And if you Americans are disappointed that you're not going to be getting that kind of information, you feel free to watch a different astrology channel. I don't give a shit. Okay, go watch different content. Right? Basically, there's something about this that I feel predominates this. I pointed out a number of different things. First of all, that the Saturn and Neptune conjunction, that is ruling, Saturn being the ruler of Capricorn. Saturn often stands for something maybe a little bit limited, maybe or maybe concerned about boundaries, setting certain boundaries of what I'm going to do with this channel, what I'm not going to do with this channel, certain limits of what I want to pay attention to on the internet, what I don't want to pay attention to on the internet, certain boundaries of like maybe I do care about politics, but maybe I if somebody wants to do make political influencer content on the internet, that I'll let somebody else take the lead with that because I'm really not inspired to become a talking head to make viral little shorts to entertain you people while your world burns down around you. It's not really something that motivates me. I'm sorry. But I do like making astrology videos, right? So there's certain limits. So there's certain, but the thing was something about which is I find interesting about this. If you take it back to that, we have a certain creative choice. All I have to admit, maybe I'm giving away my certain judgmental attitude or criticism towards other astrologers and their creative choices. But I'm not going to be doing that kind of stuff. Um, and I can see there's certain limitation theme around Saturn and Neptune. In a past video, I made the association with the prediction of a RAM shortage this year. So that this is basically brought on by the AI bubble, basically, and the need for random access memory. For those who are not computer literate, you have a hard drive which stores gigabytes upon, or whatever, you have a whole terabytes of data in a hard drive, but in order to bring those up onto your screen, to play a file, to play a game, to load things into so that they are being played, you need to bring those from the hard drive into your random access memory, right? And when you are low on RAM, this is if you've been playing too many video games and your RAM needs to reset itself, you may have to reset your computer or something like that to refresh your random access memory so you can load things, right? There's something about what has been transpiring in the global political sphere. For example, the invasion of Venezuela, taking out Maduro, whatever. I was recently watching a Francis Fukuyama's statement on this, and Francis Fukuyama basically criticized this for a number of reasons because he was comparing it to, well, first of all, if we look at what has happened in the 21st century so far with what you would call American state building endeavors, where you have certain countries where, for example, Saddam Hussein taken out in Iraq, or certain governments, or there's the thing about this is that America lost the war in Afghanistan. If you recall, America was at war with Afghanistan for a while, and they lost, and the Taliban took over. The Afghanistan is under Taliban control. They lost the war in Iraq. The idea that the Soviet Union fell apart, and there was efforts to create a new free democracy in Russia. Obviously, we know that didn't turn out very well. The thing about this is that with the Venezuela thing going on right now, there's something about it seems like there's a certain attitude of like a surgeon who wants to like surgically do as little as possible, right? Like there's a certain kind of like, imagine if you're like a sushi, you're like working at a fish restaurant and you need to cut a fish, right? If you're a good butcher, you can cut the fish off the bone with as little strokes as possible and present a cleanly served piece of meat to the customer. You don't want to do a total hack job of it, right? And so there could be a certain like principle behind this that we're going to, with being very efficient for minimum energy expended with the most maximum return, right? So we don't want to waste too much energy actually getting involved with Venezuela, but if we just remove the head of state and then, just bomb a few boats, this should be enough to like intimidate them so that we can, like, basically the idea is that you disrupt the Russians' and Venezuelan, the whole BRICS thing, right? The obvious thing is also you've got BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China as this like uh, anti-NATO like global force, and that by you can see what they're kind of doing here is that by if United States takes over Venezuela, who's next door to Venezuela? Brazil. You've got this whole to disrupt that whole BRICS thing is like I don't which is kind of interesting because I'm kind of confused because like from the amount of commentary I've seen the news people talking about this, I'm actually kind of surprised that people aren't mentioning BRICS and Brazil in the equation here. There's also kind of interesting like the whole project of Donald Trump where he's friendly with the really Bolsonaro, that Trump-like politician who was there's some election controversy. It's very similar to January 6th, right? Like there's something about the Bolsonaro in Brazil and January 6th and how Trump's friendly with him and Trump's like it's kind of like this kind of like American. There's this basic like principle like back when you had the Cold War, you had this idea that America stood for freedom and democracy, and communism was like this threat of this scary thing that they had to like protect against, and they wanted to like spread freedom and democracy around. But now it seems like it's like you have the age of like trumpet populist politicians, and that they basically they don't have like an ideology of like something that they believe in. But if Trump can recognize like this, it's like the same way that like in Canada we have Doug Ford as the closest version that we have to like a Trump character, and it's funny to see the politics where we get the trade war and stuff because then we get to have like our like bully like populist politician fight the other bully populist politician. But then Trump's, I like this guy because he reminds me of me. Like they can have that attitude, and it's like rather than having an ideology, they can be like, yeah, I recognize that you are your country's equivalent to what I am for my country, and even if we are pitted against each other, I like you because you have my style, right? I don't really understand. Like at some basic level, there's this kind of thing where instead of having like it's like a bunch of tyrants that basically like each other being bullies and so this is basically like with like Trump and Putin where it's like look rather than trying to having this pretentious like we're going to spread freedom and democracy to other countries, why don't we just be like, hey man, I see you're a dictator, you're a tyrant, I like your style, like why don't I instead of me coming in and telling you how to do your business, why don't we just do this, like why don't we treat Venezuela like it's our Ukraine, like we've got some poor people that are sitting on a bunch of resources, it'll be really like why don't we just normalize this, like we're just going to be tyrannical bullies to the people around us, and rather than being on this high moral high horse that that we're going to spread freedom and democracy around, right? Or that there's like some sort of like we're going to create a better system that's going to be better for the people. Why don't we just like this is why people like Donald Trump is because he doesn't bullshit people, right? Like he's just going to be very. I also have to admit that I have limited traveling experience, but I feel like in my limited traveling experience, I did go to Eastern Europe, and in my interactions trying to communicate with Eastern European people, I was trying to ask them about what it was like in Eastern Europe with all the like corruption or whatever, and they were basically saying, well, like it's like the whole world is corrupt, but when you're in like the Yugoslavian Eastern Bloc Balkan area, like when there's corruption, they do it with the gloves off. There's no pretense. Like there's a whole thing about like red pill, blue pill matrix analogy is like the blue pill is like there's this fantasy that everything is like we have this sort of like high ideals of democratic socialism and progress, and we're electing people to make everything better. When you're in a shitty third world, post-Soviet collapse country and there's corruption, like they don't try to hide it. Like everybody, if you're getting fucked, you're getting fucked and you just know it. And there's no pretense to some like higher principle of freedom and democracy and all this kind of stuff. This is maybe a bit of a rant, but what I'm trying to, there's something about this too that what Francis Fukuyama was talking, like Francis Fukuyama is famous because he was talking about the end of history, that the freedom and democracy of social democracy and free trade and capitalism had won the grand historical narrative, and we now lived in a. He's gone back. He's like apparently not. Apparently, that whole thing has fallen apart, and history is in the process of being written, basically, right? And Francis Fukuyama basically also criticizes this Venezuela thing because basically like the idea is that you're just going to like surgically remove Maduro, then leave everything else the way it is, and then disrupt the trade with BRICS, I guess, or like I don't know if Venezuela was part of BRICS, or like try to make South America under the domination of North America, and basically compete with Russia at that level rather than an all-out war seems to be what's going on. But Fukuyama basically criticizes this because chances are he like if you want to control, if you basically you want to have your hand in another country and control it, basically this like there's the tendency for this to require more and more and more of an investment of time and energy and all this kind of stuff. And this only builds up your identity as being like an imperialistic colonial power and basically the dominator who has to keep spending more and more energy like as a war in Iraq or a war in Afghanistan or a war in Vietnam, that you never America does not have a good track record with this, right? So in all, if you look at how it's gone so far with America starting war in other countries, and like how what the track record is, and the kind of gamble that they're taking, from experts in the field, like this is basically I'm also this is maybe a tell that instead of like trying to like use astrology to get any more information with this, I'm listening to Francis Fukuyama, and but okay, well, there is a certain, you can see the certain astrological correlation for anyways that I thought, because there's a certain kind of gambling or certain risk taking with this opposition to Jupiter, right? And that I can tie back in the Francis Fukuyama thing with this Jupiter in a trine to Saturn and Neptune, because it's basically like, imagine like Venezuela. Imagine like you just like the war in Venezuela, or the game, like it's like they have all these new like Dune games out right now where you can play like a massively multiplayer online RPG set in the Dune universe, or like he who controls the spice controls the universe, all that stuff. But it's like there's something about all this you have to understand, like what if this whole project of like controlling the resources and the trade in Venezuela, rather than a free trade as like kind of a dictatorial, tyrannical, fascist regime, like what if not only if this is just like a failing project from the beginning, like what if this is like you can compare it to getting a new video game that your computer does not quite have the RAM for, and it's like you are really ambitious and really excited to play this new game, and you're gonna be like, yeah, we're gonna control the universe, and then you like get to like the first loading screen, and it just like gets stuck loading, and you're like, what's going on? Right? Like this is like, do you guys like as America, do you guys really have the random access memory for this whole project right now? And then as if I'm looking at what other astrologers are doing in terms of, well, whatever, like we have all this stuff to account for with ICE killing civilians. Like maybe like I don't have the RAM, I don't have the emotional random access memory to spend time watching American militarized police shoot their own civilians and sit here fucking paralyzed as a Canadian with not being able to fucking talk about this with my family because they just want to be like positive and think about like, I don't know, just they want to live a comfortable, peaceful life and not stress out about what's happening on the news. So it's kind of like this, at least it's like, so it helps for me to create this channel as a container where I can have this space where it's like, we've got me and my personal life as one thing, and then we've got the whole fucking universe out there with stars and planets and like, fucking fascist regimes and militarized police, but it's all fucking like out there. And at least, in terms of, who the fuck knows what's going on in terms of my own neighborhood, right? But we're not going to talk about that, because if I did, I'd dox myself, right? And I'd be, you got to, for online safety first, everybody. So I'm going to, everything local is going to be covered in a fog of ambiguity or lack of emotional investment or something like that. And I'm going to instead talk about more like far wide frame things, because, well, whatever, like the system leads to a place where you feel really detached and alien from your grounded local environment, and very much invested on, like, what country is getting invaded today or whatever, right? And like, I don't know, maybe I could go down to the art gallery and hang out with all the Iranians protesting, if I get bored of this and want something to do. I don't, like, I'll be down, I'm going to be down that area. I might be getting called into it for jury duty, apparently. We'll see how that turns out. Anyways, this is basically where I'm at for today. If you were if you were expecting that I was going to go through like the 12 signs or horoscopes, I haven't been doing that with my new moon videos. I should also say, before I stop, that I was thinking about the whole thing about, people talk about like new moons and like setting new intentions and stuff like that. And it's like, for me, even approaching that is a contentious issue, because I have been trying to learn more about the idea of like working with intentions by reading Deepak Chopra. But then apparently Deepak Chopra has been exposed in the Epstein files, right? And so this is another thing where I don't know. I'm not seeing any accountability from the spiritual community around Deepak Chopra, and also Mick Jagger, for Christ's sake, the Rolling Stones, which brings up another thing. What the fuck happened with Brian Jones, right? Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones, has Mick Jagger been complicit in these government conspiracies the whole time? And like, how do we know that Paul McCartney is the real Paul McCartney? Maybe Paul McCartney died the same time as Mick Jones, right? Like that. These are some things, let me know what you think in the comments. What happened to Mick Jones? What happened to Mick Jagger? What happened to Deepak Chopra? And we need to get this fucking shit out of the way before we can talk about setting new intentions, for Christ's sake, okay? Jesus Christ. Thanks for watching.